in too deep. Oh, it's been 2 years, I miss my home, but there's a fire burning in my bones. Still believe, yeah, I still believe. And all those things I didn't say were wrecking balls inside my brain. I will scream, I'm loud tonight. Can you hear my voice this time? This is my fight song. Take back my life song. Prove I'm alright song. My power's turned on. Starting right now, I'll be strong. I'll play my fight song. And I don't really care if nobody else believes, 'cause I've still got a lot of fight left in me. A lot of fight left in me. Like a small boat on the ocean, sending big waves into motion. Like how a single word can make a heart open. I might only have one match, but I can make an explosion. This is my fight song. Take back my life song. Prove I'm alright song. My power's turned on. Starting right now, I'll be strong. I'll play my fight song. And I don't really care if nobody else believes, 'cause I've still got a lot of fight left in me.
Past lives could never hold me down. Lost love, sweeter when it's just feeling. This isn't our first time around. Past lives couldn't ever come between us. Sometimes the dreamers finally wake up. Don't wake me, I'm not dreaming. Don't wake me, I'm not dreaming. Past lives couldn't ever hold me down. Lost love, sweeter when it's finally found. I got the strangest feeling. This isn't our first time around. Past lives couldn't ever come between us. Sometimes the dreamers finally wake up.
like a small boat on the ocean, sending big waves into motion, like how a single word can make a heart open. I might only have one match, but I can make an explosion. And all those things I didn't say were wrecking balls inside my brain. I will scream loud tonight. Can you hear my voice this time? This is my fight song. Take back my life song. Prove I'm alright song. My power.
Okay, just checking if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to the Grand High School Grand Final round of ALSA English Competition 2026. Congratulations everyone for making it this far. We hope that this is going to be an amazing debate for everyone participating and also watching. So the songs should have given you a little bit of hint already about what we're going to talk about in this round. So I'm gonna move on to the theme. We're gonna talk about regulations. So there will be 3 contact slides for this round. So bear with me, everyone. So the first context slide reads, digital labor platforms are app-based services that connect workers with clients or facilities by matching labor supply and demand through algorithmic systems where workers are typically classified as independent contractors rather than employees of the platform. Currently, major DLPs are predominantly regulated through general technology and platform frameworks rather than sector-specific labor and industry standards, as these platforms argue that they are separate entities from the workers that they deploy. I'm going to give 3 seconds for everyone to read and screenshot the context slide. 3, 2, 1. So the context slide for motion number 2 reads, Jaminan Hari Tua atau JHT is a state-controlled retirement savings program managed by BPJS Ketenagakerjaan in which the government determines all key aspects of the scheme. This includes setting the mandatory contribution rate, that is 2% from employees, deciding how the funds are invested, typically in conservative instruments such as government bonds, and regulating payout conditions such as upon retirement, termination of employment, or other specified circumstances, leaving participants with little to no control over how their funds are managed. I'm going to give 3 seconds for everyone to read the context slide. 3, 2, 1. And context slide for motion number 3 reads, regenerative medicine refers to a branch of biomedical science that aims to repair, replace, or regenerate damaged cells, tissues, or organs to restore normal function, rather than merely treating symptoms, e.g. stem cell therapy, tissue engineering, cell-based immunotherapies, etc. A lot of the regenerative medicine are currently within phase 1 and 2 of development, but struggle to pass through the next phase of clinical trial, i.e. stage 3 and final, due to tight regulation within their country, e.g. US with their FDA, Food and Drug Administration, EU with their ATMP, that is Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products Regulation, etc. 3 seconds to read the context slide. Three, two, one. And the motion for high school grand final reads, Motion 1. This House believes that developing countries should subject digital label platforms to regulatory standards of the sector that they operate in, e.g. Grab as a transportation service provider, or ShiftMed as healthcare staffing agency, etc. Motion number 2 reads, This House believes that Indonesia should recognize a legal right for individuals to personalize their Jehate accounts. And motion number 3 reads, This House believes that developing countries should position themselves as regulatory havens for experimental regenerative medicine. So time is now 10:13. That means debate will start at 10:43. So good luck everyone for the grand final round. And any questions, please direct it to the WhatsApp group.
2026. My name is Yehezkiel, and you can call me EL. I'll be the chair for this round. Judging with me, I'm not alone. So can my panelists please also introduce themselves according to the alphabetical order in the tab, starting with Tisha.
Hi everyone, I'm Elma. Best of luck.
Hi, I'm Joka. Good luck, everyone.
Hello, my name is Marcel. Good luck for the grand final.
Hi, JJ here. Best of luck for both teams.
Hello everyone, my name is Suzy and good luck for both teams.
And this is Upi. All the best, everyone.
Great. Yeah. A few housekeeping rules before we start. Of course, please state your POI and also gender preference before you start your speech. Do not forget to give and take POIs to make this debate more engaging. Also, please time yourself as I won't be timing in the chat box, but do not worry, I'll have a timer on. 7 minutes and 20 seconds for speeches and 4 minutes and 20 seconds for reply. And last but not least, please make this debate as equitable and as fun as possible. Yeah, with that being said, under the motion of this House believes that Indonesia should recognize a legal right for individuals to personalize their Jihad accounts, I call upon Prime Minister to open up this debate. Here.
Okay. Give me a moment to set up my timer. So for my POI preference, you can just unmute and you can say if you want to give POI. But I'm also going to give a chance later, a specific point in my speech where you can give a POI. So you can also wait for that as well. Okay, so without further ado, wait, am I audible? I think I'm audible, right?
Yep.
Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to start my speech in in 3, 2, 1. Finals, this debate isn't about how safe it is for some to retire, but it's about capital sovereignty. What's the problem with the current JHT is that it's a black box system. Workers see money disappear from their paychecks into a state fund they cannot influence, and which often provides return lower than simple inflation or private mutual funds. So what's the Indonesian government goal here? We believe that the goal of the Indonesian state isn't just to keep people alive at 56. Of course, it's to create financial resilience. And the developing economy, locked away capital is dead capital. It is beneficial for the Indonesian government because a government, of course, wants a healthy and fluctuating economy with as many active transactions as possible. Without JHT, when these people go into retirement and lose their monthly paychecks, they'll have to cut down on their expenses without JHT and leads to a less fluctuating economy. Now, we believe that there are three main actors here: the Indonesian government, the majority of Indonesians, as well as the most vulnerable here, and we're going to characterize all of them. First of all, on the Indonesian government, we've already explained the interests of the Indonesian government in this motion. What are their incentives here? Of course, the incentive of the Indonesian government is to reduce the burden of APBN when these citizens do retire, so that they are less likely to rely on government handouts later. This doesn't happen in the status quo because what happens currently is that despite the JHT, countless elderly still fall into poverty when they do get retired and have to rely on state help to get by every day, and this burdens the APBN. So what's their capacity here? We believe that government has the capacity to have digital platforms and infrastructure. For example, JM already exists, which is Jamsos Tech Mobile, and they have the capacity to offer created investment tiers. We aren't going to let these people randomly buy meme coins or cryptocurrency, but we are going to give a choice for these people to pick between state-vetted portfolios with different risk assessments. I'm going to explain this further on my mechanism. And this is a win for the government because personalization makes formal employment more attractive. Many Indonesians stay in the informal sector because they hate losing like 5.7, like a cut of their salary to a fund they don't control. This brings more people into the tax net, which is a win for the government. And we also have to talk about the Indonesia economic condition, which is mostly reliant on the middle class. They are the economic cushion for the Indonesia economy because the majority of the people are there and they spend the most amount of money every single month. So Indonesia's government's priority here would be it should be to protect the middle class here and make sure that when they do retire, they still have the capacity to spend actively every single month, so it won't hurt the economy of Indonesia. Now, what about the majority of Indonesians here? We believe that their interest here is to, of course, to protection and against inflation. We believe that their capability is that Indonesia has already has one of the highest rates of digital financial adoption. For example, a lot of these people are already active users of GoPay, Shopee Pay, also not to mention the various investment platforms that are easy to use right now, let's ask Bibit or StockBit. The majority of them are not like financially illiterate, as in that they don't understand what a stock is. More on that on my arguments later. Now, the point is that currently in status quo on the opposition side is that it's a one-size-fits-all fund, which is funnily unjust for a diverse population. So, for example, we believe that a high school, a university graduate who's working as a software engineer, of course, has a different risk assessment portfolio compared to a 50-year-old factory worker. They have different needs, but what happens in opposition side is that's a one size fit all. This is of course different. This of course doesn't work. And lastly is for the most vulnerable. What they want is, of course, they want to prioritize immediate survival and shock absorption, of course, because they don't have like guaranteed monthly income. Now, the incentive here for them is that for the most vulnerable, a medical emergency or a sudden layoff, or they suddenly have to pay for their children's school, is much more dangerous than retirement at 56. They need the ability to personalize the withdrawal triggers. And this doesn't happen at opposition side because there isn't any like personalized withdrawal triggers. And if they suddenly get hit by something that's bad for them, they can't do anything about it. So what's the personalization that we're talking about on our side? We're going to provide four things. First of all is tiered risk portfolios. So users don't get to choose exactly what the stock they're going to buy, but they can choose the general point on what these stocks are. So for example, there's aggressive risk like infrastructure and equity, conservative risks like bonds or gold, and also like religious tiered risk like Sharia. And we also add the option to provide life event triggers. This allows personalizations of when you can pull out, for example, a first home purchase, a children's university, etc. We also have the default shield, which means that if someone don't choose, they're going to stay in the current safe default. We are adding an option, not a mandate. So they don't have to choose if they still want to like stay with the current system. It's completely up to them. And we're going to add we're gonna have a mandatory floor percentage, but a personalized ceiling, so they can determine how many funds they can themselves, as long as it's above the mandatory floor percentage. Now, before going to my arguments, I can take a point. 3, 2, 1.
A question. If you ask a normal street shop within Indonesia, are you sure that the street
Okay. This
seller
about the financial
will
literacy,
definitely
right?
use Bibit?
Okay, I can get it. Okay, so this ties directly into my first argument on likelihood of financial illiteracy. First of all, is that Indonesia is one of the fastest to adapt their financial system digitally. For example, Curious, GoPay, Bibit, StockBit. This is very alive in Indonesia. Second of all, by the COVID-19 hit, a lot of people are forced to stay at home. They lost their livelihood. So a majority of people had to go digitally to find their livelihood. And the third of all is the rise of the digital economy and investment content in social media as general. We can see this by the rise of Indonesian influencers like Ellen May or Raymond Surya. They make easy to access and digestible content about investment, and it is in their interest to make it as truthful and easy to digest, because if it's not truthful, it's going to cause them to go into a lawsuit. For example, look at Timothy Ronald. And because of social media's attention market scheme, they need to make it as watchable for the average Indonesian. So we're not saying that they are a tech savvy investment banker, but at least they are aware of the stock market and investment, opposed to what opposition believes. And even if they aren't like completely aware, it is very easy to access information nowadays with a lot less friction. So why is this better on our side? Because if we give personalization, it takes the option back into their own hands and have some level of monitoring and control rather than a black box system on opposition side. They also have the capacity to understand their financial risk. So what happens on op is that they have no control over the JHT, and even if they talk about they still have other assets that they can manage personally opposed to JHT on their side, we'd argue that people would rather have complete control rather than losing partial control, which is why it's better on our side. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Now to open up the case coming from opposition, I call upon Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Wait, really? Bentar. Kak, wait, kedengeran nggak, Kak?
Yes, you're audible, Paul.
Alright. Hmm. UI preference, please just unmute your mic because I will not be checking the chat at all. Pronouns are she, her. All I say is for the sake of the debate. Yeah. Starting my speech in three, wait, sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason a child's autonomy is given towards their parents is simply because a child isn't capable to take care of themselves and they do not have the same knowledge as their parents. This is why responsibility is the prerequisite of having autonomy itself. If you cannot manage your assets, you do not get, it's better for you to just give it to someone who has better knowledge towards it. So proud to become opposition. Let's start with a few layers of setup here right from out of the bat. Firstly, let's just talk about how our world looks like because I feel like the rest of the framing has been done by proposition. What does opposition's world looks like? It means that A, the ones that are entitled to opposition's world looks like jihate, which means that people who are entitled to this are usually the lower stratification level of society. This looks like people who live paycheck to paycheck or just aren't that privileged to have enough money to sustain them once they to sustain them once they do not have a job anymore in the future, etc., or do not have any like real like actual significant life savings, etc. Then B, the funding for jihate, which comes from where the government takes probably 2% from the income of where these kinds of lower income people get, right, from their employment, etc. Then C, what Indonesia's conservative instruments look like, like the stuff that the government are going to invest in, are going to invest your money into low risk investments that basically controls your funds, right? Simply because government has immense stakes because once the investment fails, the government will most likely face massive backlash from society, especially from demagogic populists, which in the end will strip the power of the government from the country. This is an incentive why the government will most likely invest your money in low risk things that are going to be something stable, but you still will get profit at the end of the day. But then lastly, which mean that this is going to be less burden for these people to worry about their assets, etc., even when you get termination of employment, simply because when you get termination or suddenly you get PHK, these people can access these emergency funds that have been given to you from the government, etc. Two arguments today. Firstly, autonomy of these lower certification level people cannot be justified. Secondly, state intervention towards autonomy is justified. Firstly, on autonomy that cannot be justified. Notice that if you want to gain the privilege of autonomy over your assets, over your funds, you have a burden, which is to have this responsibility or the capability to actually regulate your funds, to actually know how to do this. Actors that are involved in this motion aren't responsible or capable to decide their own fund allocation, simply because they are the ones who are from the lower stratification level, which means that they are born in a cycle of poverty. That is to say that they never even had the privilege to access great education in the first place. They most likely didn't have funds to do that. Hence, but then even if they had these funds to have like education, like probably KIP, etc., this is probably still going to be lacking simply because most of the free education that they can access from the government is usually basic knowledge that never really actually touch upon like actual financial literacy, etc. Why is this important? Simply because education is the main channel on how these people learn decision making, economic trends, financial literacy, etc. When they don't have really great financial literacy because of the lack of education they get, they have no idea on how to manage their assets. Why is this important? What's the impact of this? Simply because now, when you don't know how to manage your assets, you're going to make irrational decisions. Like what? This looks like one. You're probably going to be prone to manipulation simply because a lot of scammers out there take advantage of this. They are aware that you have the lack of education and the fact that this policy is most likely going to be publicized that you have full autonomy. They're probably going to try to take advantage of this and probably just like manipulate this and manipulate you to actually invest in their stuff, etc. etc., that is most likely going to be a scam. And these lower stratification people do not know any better, simply because they usually are really desperate, or they usually do not have this like do not aren't really access to do not aren't really like aware of like scams, etc., which usually are educated towards programs, etc., that they can't even access in the first place. Also because these scams are usually very promising, which these desperate lower stratification people want. But then secondly, they're probably going to misallocate their funds with what this looks like them putting investments in really high risk investments. This most likely happens because they do not understand the global stocks. They do not know the stakes that there's going to be within investments, etc. Because digital literacy is not that great for them. Hence, they're probably try to invest as big as possible, simply because this looks like something that is the most promising to them, and this is something that is more enticing to them, simply because now they can suddenly like look at seem like it's going to actually push them out of the stratification level, etc. But then thirdly, worst case scenario, they can even also use these funds for this the sense of self fulfillment that is quote unquote rational for them, simply because they have never gotten the chance to actually spend their money on stuff that give them self fulfillment, or the actual like the interest of themselves. This probably can look like judo, etc., which can also be addicting, etc. But then fourthly, the poor people, they do not have any backup. They notice that they are poor people, which means that they do not have any backup money in the first place. That's why they were even in Jehate in the first place. When you have full autonomy, that means that they cannot really rely on anything else, which means that once they fall into a scam, etc., their whole life will crumble, simply because they do not have any backup life savings, etc. But then yeah, let's just lastly engage with proposition, even though it's really best case scenario. These lower class, they said that these lower class people can learn to invest, etc., because of the digitalization. This is flawed, simply because not all people have the accessibility of digitalization. Most rural areas don't even have internet in the first place. Just because proposition lives in Jakarta and gets digital privilege in Jakarta, that doesn't mean that everybody has the privilege that like what proposition team has. But then secondly, even if they have these kinds of things, they usually lack the incentive to actually do this, simply because they never really understood the importance of learning how to invest anyway, because of the lack of awareness that is shown in the society on in the environment of these lower certification level. The comparative here is simple. Notice that under our side, the government does low risk investments like money market or government bonds, which is going to be more secure. Hence, it's going to live like a more secure life for these citizens. And also, secondly, the burden of these citizens to actually have responsibility is going to be actually held by the government. But then second argument on state intervention towards autonomy is justified, simply because principally the state has the right to protect their citizens, because the state is the government was made simply to actually help the citizens, and to become a body that actually controls the country to make it look to make it something that is somewhat utopic, etc. That means that as long as we prove to you why citizens full autonomy is going to be something that is dangerous and requires state protection, that means that we can just win this debate, simply because we fulfilled the burden to prove that the responsibility should be given towards the state. Opposition.
All right, thank you very much for your speech. Now to respond to case coming from opposition, DPM, here.
Sorry, give me a second to set my timer. Just to check, am I visible and audible?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'll be starting before that, my POI preferences are I'll be giving a specific window where you can ask. So please wait for the window if you have a POI. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, they were clearly not listening to us on the mechanism on how personalization looks like. They said that these people will be scammed, but no, look at it on their side. People are financially illiterate and they're falling into this government trap. Now, they say the Op Pictures government as a very bad actor and that the state must protect workers for themselves. Op claims that without the state deciding their investments, workers will lose their money, which is a mischaracterization on their side of what personalization actually means. We are not saying that workers will take their jehate and buy unregulated methods of investment. But personalization means BPJS offers a menu of unregulated tiered portfolios, and the money remains within a secure framework, but the choice shifts to the workers too. They claim that the status quo protects workers. We flip this because under the status quo itself, BPJS primarily invests JHT funds into government bonds. Why? Not because it yields the highest return for the workers, but because the government needs cheap capital to fund its own state projects. This is a massive conflict of interest. The state is using the working classes retirement fund as a slush fund for its own agenda, exploiting the workers' individual yield. Third, JHT is not a state welfare handout. It is a 2% deduction from the workers' own hard-earned salary. The state is a custodian, not the owner. Denying individuals the right to optimize their own property is a fundamental violation of their financial autonomy and their right. They keep on talking about autonomy itself, but the autonomy on their side is being violated, judges. Now, on the point where why conservative government bonds harms the workers in the long run, judges, here's how retirement funds actually grow. The power of a retirement fund relies on gradual, decades-long compounding interest. By forcing the population into these instruments, the state yields around 5 to 6% annually. Macroeconomic factors like world inflation, healthcare, rising cost of living in Indonesia actually outpace this. So by the time they retire, the purchasing power of their JHT has actually stagnated. Second, OP argues that on their side it's safer and better because government invests in low risk bonds. This is exactly why it's flawed in the status quo. Opposition champions a one-size-fits-all mechanism when people have different capacities and risk portfolios. We already stated since the first speaker that that what happens in status quo is that people still rely on state help, which burdens the APBN themselves. OP does not address this. Now, on the point of financial literacy, OP might say that OP says that due to Indonesia's overall poor education, people are financially illiterate. We concede that yes, Indonesia's education is poor, and we would gladly want to improve that. But we disagree with their claim that everyone in Indonesia is financially illiterate, because you can still access, as my first speaker says, a wide array of financial education. But even when we play onto their harm, the issue itself is not just their incapability, but the BPJS system that fails to protect the workers. It traps their money in conservative instruments that barely outpace inflation, effectively guaranteeing that their retirement fund will be insufficient. And it's still better on our side, judges, because on our side, they have personalized withdrawal triggers. When they get hit with a massive hospital bill, on our side, they have the chance to take out their money compared to on their side, they can pull out at all. We are protecting the most vulnerable while they are not. Their argument on scams, if we assume they are financially illiterate as they say they are, which we've proven it is not necessarily, they are more highly unlikely to get affected by scams on their side because they have no personalization on a ceiling of how many money you put into the JHT. So the funds, if they don't put into JHT, they have to manage manually. And if they are illiterate, it is more dangerous on their side, and they are more highly likely to be affected by the scams because it is not managed by the government themselves. Now, under the status quo, before that, I can take a point. 3, 2, 1.
Is it likely that government have the capacity to cater and personalize every single account within JHT?
The one who's catering and personalizing is not the government themselves, but then the government, what the government is offering is several options that is characterized of if you invest into this, what are the risks, what are the benefits that you can take, because we will expand later on how the population differs based on their interests themselves, and therefore the government offers the chance for you to personalize your own belongings based on what is it that your financial situation and your capacity itself. Now, under the status quo, BPJS mandates participation and workers cannot move their fund, making it a monopoly, because then BPJS has zero incentive to innovate, negotiate lower administrative fee, or actually aggressively pursue higher yields. They are guaranteed a steady inflow of cash every month, regardless of their performance. The moment you introduce personalization, you force institutional accountability on our side. If workers have the legal right to allocate their funds into different approved asset classes, BPJS and its fund managers are suddenly forced to compete for the workers' allocation by proving they can deliver good returns. Now, on our side, this is much better because what we have proven to you is that we tackle the structure that
Okay.
the workforce have vastly different needs and capacity. A young
Hi.
first-job
Sorry.
employee can weather short-term market volatility to capture high-yield growth of equities. But compared to a senior who needs conservative stability, these young workers lose opportunities of higher long-term growth and protection from inflation. On our side, though, individuals can choose portfolios based on their age, risk tolerance, and priorities. These funds become more responsive to actual participant needs. This is important because the retirement planning is something that is long-term and situation-based. And a young worker and a senior worker should not necessarily have identical financial structures. This is very likely because financial diversity naturally creates different preferences. Young workers generally tolerate higher risk and longer growth over older workers who prefer stability and liquidity. Even if some people make imperfect choices, on our side, people are still more likely to benefit from the systems tailored to their own realities than from the rigid system itself. Now, personalization also increases trust, ownership, and participation in the retirement system, which helps to the macro impact of Indonesia itself. We prevent the challenge that its status quo is facing because through this, people are more willing to contribute and engage. Since participants gain more legal control, their retirement savings are viewed as their own assets rather than the government-controlled deduction. People also become more financially engaged, and at a macro scale, there's an increase of retirement literacy and long-term incentives. Now, this is very much important because pension systems also depend on public trust and participation. If citizens don't engage, then general compliance weakens. So it's not within the incentive of governments to actually go onto this, and it's incentive for them to put on this personalization mechanism because it benefits them. And this is likely because generally people value autonomy and transparency over their personal finances, especially when younger generation become increasingly skeptical of centralized management because of status quo. So when they say that the people are financially illiterate, this actually helps even people who are financially illiterate to choose and make the right decisions, even though they might not have the same intellectual capacity as those who are privileged do. Now, we win this debate on the metric of irreversibility. You cannot rewind time to regain 30 years of lost compounding interest, judges. The status quo permanently robs the Indonesian working class of their upward economic mobility because workers deserve the right to outpace inflation and own their financial future. We are so proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Now to continue the case coming from opposition, DLO here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna start at my first word. Let's try to attack reframing when they tell you that government will be their own private accountant. Firstly, government isn't your private assistant. Most likely, they don't have that much government workers to cater to every single person. Personalization. Government is most likely underfunded within the sector and will be overwhelmed on their side. This is why even when they say fancy words as in like institutional accountability, insofar as capacity is unproven, which I've POI'd them, then their benefit is also low. But then secondly, even if they have capacity, we tell you that they cannot personalize it that easily. They will have limited resources or options on where to choose which funds they want to invest in. What government is going to give is just long-term, slow investment. Because if you want to say that they can do high risk to get high money, we tell you that government doesn't have that much capacity to manage and see every single high risk things, because in high risk kind of like investment, you constantly need to check the stocks every single minute or like every single hour in itself. And we tell you government doesn't have that much capacity to manage every single person Jihate account and change every single day. Thirdly, the fact that they have low capacity means that the pros and cons given by the government that DPM tells you is also marginal or like small, where they get just like give main big points that leaves little details that might also change the smallest decision that you can make. So if your options is limited, plus it is flawed because of limitations, then your autonomy is also affected, which is flawed. Let's go to the clashes then. Is autonomy justified or no? They tell you that investment is lower than the inflation, which means like lower profit when you invest in these kinds of things. But then also the second premise that they give you is that majority of Indonesians have good digital economic literacy, like Pibet. Okay, I'm gonna attack the first one. If they say that, if they do high risk, we tell you that they take our harm and can't confirm on long-term stability for the other 90% of people who lose their money because of high risk. PM tells you that, people listen to Timothy Ronald, like tell me how many people from underprivileged community actually join their classes or actually benefit a lot for this. Because we tell you that this is a high risk and Timothy is kind of like exclusive because it is good, right? You need to pay 15 million rupiah per year. I know this because my friend uses Timothy Ronald classes because he is rich, not poor. This is why even when he loses money, he can just ask from his dad for more money. Or most likely when these people who do high risk, it's just people who has cold cash to burn off cash. This is why it isn't applicable for underprivileged individuals. What I prove here is simple: two things.
AOI.
A, digital economy literacy that is good is from their example is exclusive. B, investment within these exclusive places is hard to do anyways and is very harmful for underprivileged individuals because when they lose money, they lose their whole emergency fund and pension fund within a split second. This is why high risk is also exclusive towards privileged community. And we tell you, even if they say, oh, high risk is going to be good, we tell you they haven't relied on like the logical thinking or like the process in which they go in. But then secondly, the fact that they tell you that, oh, they have their own digital literacy in PM because they are smart, etc., means that they won't even rely from government things, means that you just have to rely on PM's framing by telling them that, oh, they're going to be independent and they're just going to go by their line of thinking. If we manage to prove to you that their financial digital literacy is flawed, then we prove to you that
AOI.
underprivileged people having autonomy is also flawed. I'll take you later. Thirdly, insofar as you cannot prove, let's go to the majority of Indonesians have the good digital economy literacy, like BIBIT, right? Firstly, the good digital economy literacy isn't BIBIT for many underprivileged families. It's most likely peer-to-peer lending like Credifo. So when we tell you that people adapt easily because they have Shopee Pay, it doesn't mean that they implement the use of BIBIT instantly. But then secondly, let's just symmetricize the claim with another uprise within Indonesians. Indonesians are also good with judo or like online gambling, which is a very big portion of our GDP, which is moved illegally through online gambling sites like Zeus through to Cambodia. So when they tell you that economy literacy exists, I do think using your Dana balance to top up in Zeus is also a form of digital economic literacy, and this is why we tell you it is bad. But then thirdly, I'm just gonna bring you a reality check. A lot of people are like affected by judo or like the online gambling premise or like the online gambling normalization. So if you go to a normal person, most likely they're probably gonna take out their emergency fund just because they don't know the harms of it. I'll tell you later why it's likely for them to not understand the harm that much. I'll tell you later. Just wait. Most likely, sure, the normal street shop or like street seller know that Bibit is an app, but actually don't do it because they don't have enough capability or enough money. Because what Gabby told you, it is simple. It is underprivileged society who lives paycheck to paycheck, which means that they have less capacity to invest that much. POI.
Isn't scams more vulnerable on your side because when and the money they will do put into Jayate, they have to manage it themselves. How is it lower on your side?
They have to manage them themselves. No, the government manage them themselves using a centralized system where they control every single person, which is a lower investment, which means everyone is controlled easily. I don't get their point. Let's go on to the extension, why our side brings more autonomy. The premise here is that autonomy is unlimited to what you do in status quo, but it should also account for future autonomy. Sure, you can use your autonomy to jump off a cliff without a parachute in status quo, but you cannot use your autonomy after you fall because you're dead. Because this correlates with Gabby here. The state has the principle to protect people, so if I prove that autonomy is given for them more, then we tell you that the state has reached the goal. The problem here is simple. The long-term stuff for poor people can help them focus on other things, like this lessens the burden of them to thinking like, oh, how should I personalize this? Because the most burden that you have to think about pension funds is like, how do you control it? How do you personalize these kinds of stuff? And like, after overtime work or after a double time job, it is very, very frustrating for you to think about like, oh, is my stocks doing okay? Or like the fact that they just don't have enough capacity or capability to say like, oh, banker, can you like pull out my money right now because like it is doing bad in stocks? Like, these are the personalization that you do, but you cannot really do because the personalization because even if they say like, oh, but then the banks will like control it for them, we tell you capability doesn't exist for them, and they're playing at the very best case scenario where a lot of people is just the private accountants for the privileged people, which we tell you is flawed. Secondly, we tell you that they cannot invest that much onto two likelihoods. A, the perception of time is very distorted for people. For normal people who sure understand the concept of time, they can't really feel or measure it correctly internally. This is why the majority of students can say that I'm going to study for a while before the exam starts, but they do it the day before. Or maybe it is the reason why many criminals will do crime because they don't understand clearly that 10 years is that long. But this means it is simple for a person to like, oh, I'm just going to use this money to do, or like I'm just going to use this money to YOLO, live my life in the moment right now, but they don't understand what's going to happen for them in the long term. B, even if it is not the perception of time, we tell you that the majority of people is underprivileged people who live paycheck to paycheck or below the poverty line. This is why they won't have enough funds anyways to invest at all. This is why we tell you we're so proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Now to close this substantive case coming from government, I call upon GovWeb here.
Okay, am I visible and audible?
Yep.
Okay. So my POI preference is just interrupt me. And I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Opposition has really misunderstood with government's framing. All of their harms, judo, scams, all of that is actually much worse on their side because unlike them, unlike us, they do not give these people an actual way, an actual guidance on how to actually like put their money in. But just to rush your memory, Judge, let me re-explain our framing entirely. What we do is that we give, instead of forcing people to go directly into government and give them a black box, we give them multiple tiers of options. This does not mean, Judge, that we are giving them personal portfolio managers. In fact, we already detailed to you each of these tiers from the start, from the first speaker. We've explained to you that we give multiple tiers of investment. We say that, oh, you can start with government bonds. You can go slightly risky with already state-vetted investments, very safe state-vetted investments. Or in the worst case scenario, in the very highest case, you go into the real estate market. All of these are much more stable than what OP tries to paint it as. We give them the option, or as mentioned, religious or Sharia. They haven't really been interacting with this. We do not allow them free reign with their retirement money, which is what OP tries to think that we're going to do. Thus, scams are actually impossible because all of these things have already been vetted by the government. Infrastructure, equity, bonds and gold, and religious, all has been vetted by the government. The only difference here is, again, we give them the option, OP does not. But regardless, going on to my argument, notice, panel, that even at its absolute best, OP's argument cannot solve for why the government should know better than people about the lives they are living. Opposition loses this debate because they never justify how the customization would not benefit people who have jobs with higher risk of termination or injury, for example, and who want to pull out the retirement money earlier. Yeah, okay.
What scam is rampant on our side?
All of them. This was mentioned by the first speaker, but I'll go more into this in my rebuttal. So they lose this debate because they ignore the benefit that this has to people who work high-paying jobs and want to put most of their money in retirement. People have high risk of termination or injury, or people who need that money to put their child through college. The way in here is simple, Judge. In both worlds, very little changes for the high class. They can simply invest more. However, for the middle and lower class, which make up Indonesia's economic cushion, this customization gives them agency. It gives them the agency to snowball their money and make it so that they are able to make much more in their retirement fund simply by, or be able to make it much earlier. This is very proud to oppose. But a few rebuttals that I want to take. I want to take for them. The first rebuttal is that they say that education of people is not enough, and our side leads to exploitation. But again, we already rebutted this in our mechanism, in the first speaker, extended by our second. We've already told you that there's a form of guidance in the form of these tiers. This prevents the scam that exists on the opposition side. But okay, let's be charitable and assume these people are very illiterate. Notice, panel, that by subscribing to Offside, low-class people actually have very low retirement. They have very low retirement fund in the future. Meanwhile, they still have the rest of their paycheck. This incentivizes them to invest in other means so that they're able to make much more in the future. This actually makes it much more likely that these people fall for scams. They fall for these things and end up losing their money in the future with only their retirement fund to rely on. But compare that to our side, Judge. Our side, because the retirement fund end goal is much bigger and maybe it takes up more of your paycheck. What never really happens is that people invest in those safe companies, those already vetted companies, and they get that return and they don't end up spending because they don't have that like lack of money in the future. They don't end up like going into those scams that government tries to paint us as having. But then the other point that Off tries to bring up is that, oh, this isn't feasible. The government can't have millions of personal accountants. But first of all, we already mentioned that our bonds aren't that high risk. At most, it's real estate. But second of all, because these are tiers, even if you have to move it to somewhere else, it is much more simpler because you can just move it in batches. Because we are investing in just like a set of 5 or 10 companies or a set of 5 or 10, or just invest in gold, what inevitably happens is that it's much more simpler. You at very most the government might hire a few more clerks to actually like pay attention to the gold price or pay attention to the property price. But in general, it's still incredibly simple. The only difference here, Judge, is that the people get to control people get to control the exact specificities of do they want to invest in gold or real estate
POI.
in the okay, yeah, fine.
Your main burden was that investments were lower than inflation, or like the profit from investment is lower than inflation. Your answer isn't answering the burden at all because you're saying that oh, your investment is going to be symmetric on our side.
What? Okay, so so government bonds have a lower return than inflation, and inflation goes down, right? And these other things create returns that are higher than inflation because they have they're slightly more profitable than government bonds. I feel like that's like fairly simple. But regardless, I'll move on to the three tension points in this debate that I will solve, each of which I'll deal with charitably. First of all, is on the feasibility and risk. We win because of two reasons. We already told you that Indonesian literacy isn't as low as people assume. There's already things, for example, like curious, etc., that exist. But moreover, there's also there's also the existence of the pandemic, for example, which forced people to actually interact with the online world. What this means is that people at least have a very basic understanding of like investment somewhat. And okay, let's assume that the Indonesian literacy is incredibly bad. I already told you in my rebuttal, and even in the second speaker's rebuttal, that this is actually good for us because we actually illustrate and we give people the exact options that eventually lead to much better returns. On the other side, their side kind of still keeps that in a black box. The second of all is in the effectiveness of fund. Both OP and PROP try to bring up which side is more effective, even though OP could definitely have brought more about, for example, like it's something being safe. But my second speaker has already explained why our side is more effective because of the snowballing effect. The fact is, prop has still not defended on why kind of losing that 30 years worth of snowball is much better than like having that 30 years of snowball. But lastly is attractiveness to people. It is this clash that is the tipping point for Gov because op really doesn't bring up anything substantive, but how their side actively encourages people to go into the retirement system, getting people to lose. Even if you're in the best case, having a retirement fund is better than not having a retirement fund at all because returns are so low. Because at least we provide that safety net, we provide that effectiveness, we provide that flexibility, and because Gov has not really interacted with our arguments, with our mechanism, very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Now to close the entire substantive case of this debate, I call upon Op Whip here.
Hello, am I audible?
Audible.
Okay. Hmm. Mm, okay, pronoun she, her, PI preference, please just like unmute, would not be checking the Zoom chat. Oh wait, sorry, there's like an interruption here. Okay, sorry, someone entered the library. Yeah. Um, Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When the majority of like these BPJS ketenagakerjaan users are filled with like lower class people, the ones who are like lower income and the people who like actually need this like yeah, investments and stuff to be managed by the government. This is why so proud to be like side up. I'll be starting with few rebuttals and then I'll get into my clashes later on. First is that they claim to you that, oh, under our side, you cannot get this money out for your kids' school. You cannot get this out when you need to go to the hospital, etc. You can only get it through the retirement. But yeah, you need to look at the info slide and you need to yeah, we have already told you that this is not just for that. This is for when you get PHK. This is for you when you when you retire and other specified circumstances. You getting sick and like needing to go to the hospital is a circumstances. You not being able to pay your kids school bill, etc. is like a specified circumstance. Then yeah, we've taught you that there's going to be a bunch of rampant scams under our side. We POI to them and said what scams that are rampant. They claim to you that, oh, all of them, and we have been talking about that from the first speaker. But yeah, we have never heard that from like the first speaker nor the second. This is new material that's too late in the debate because it came out in the third. Yeah, every other rebuttal will be like integrated within the clashes. I'll get into my first clash. I'll get into her first clash. Yeah. First is that their like biggest claim is like, oh, we provide you the safety net for these poor people. I'll get into my points on why we outweigh. So yeah, first is that life itself is like unpredictable, especially for these like poor people. Especially where sometimes you're quite capable of bringing food to your own dining table. Sometimes buying gorengan is like already hard for you. This is why you need like 2% to be taken from you from your like income, because now in times of need these regular payouts are now open to you for you, so you don't like die from starvation, etc. Because this 2% is already out. You already like built your life around the income without the 2%. So yeah, 2% extra fund, because Gabby has already told you like the money that these money are going to be used into low risk investment. So yeah, why does it have to be this low risk investment in the first place? What first is that it always generate profits even though it's not spiking high. It will make you lose like a significant amount of money. It'll just like, yeah, it gives you stable profits, unlike the high risk investment like crypto, etc. That might give you some hard eyes towards that amount of money, but the moment it falls you lose a significant
Why?
amount of money. This looks like my brother getting into Timothy Ronald, and then he tried out Bitcoin, and then right off the bat he told my mom, mommy, I got 4 million, and then he immediately lost 1.5 million because yeah, it's just that fluctuative. Or like a more extreme case, my classmate friend's dad who lost 8 billion in crypto because yeah, I don't know what they did. It's just simply fluctuative. It just looks like a mountain and then a valley later word. So yeah, first is that the money going into these investment themselves becoming a safety net towards these poor people. Why these government are going to put them into lower risk investment. This means that this become a continuous flow of money, even though it's not a massive rise, but at least the chart looks like a flow other than a mountain or a valley. It doesn't go up and down. It doesn't make you like lose significant of money. It gives you like, yeah, it gives you stable income. I get like 100,000 from my surat berharga or whatever. In the long term, this money builds up in my retirement fund, in my JHT fund. You now have a new income stream for your saving, because yeah, this thing is just continuously giving you profit. They
Why?
told you that, oh, come on, the investment the government made aren't even the investment that gives you the biggest return rate, etc. Government wants to protect their citizen. This has already been told by Gabi, because government has the obligation to care. That is to say, their priority isn't about giving you boom money 1M, but actually, oh, valuable asset, money market, deposit, etc. Because it's simply lower risk investment, gives you an income stream. A retirement plan on capability is like, it is better for you to have more people understanding and giving more check and balance by studying and helping the government bonds to be like more profitable to account for inflation, compared to having more people needing to be hired in order for individual to have personalization, which can like lower their profits, etc. Next one, yeah, next one is about the emergency money itself. Why safety net? Because yeah, that is the entire purpose of this thing, to provide you money from like your separate personal bank account when you need it in these circumstances. I'll get into my second clash on like what kind of
to people here. And yeah, I feel like literacy and illiterate has been like a huge point in this debate. But yeah, they claim to you, oh, they're going to gain financial literacy and this independence. But thing is, these poor people do not really have the incentive to learn this independently in the first place. These people who use JHT like BPJS Tenagaan are mostly lower classes, like lower income people. This means that they have like a different access to education. Most of them are like not that educated into like, yeah, to get this financial access and stuff. DPM taught you, you don't think about these lower classes who has a variety of portfolio that they. If you go to a random person on the street and now ask them, Pak, are you simply actively investing in different portfolios? Their response would be simply, huh? Because they're not aware of what it is. You can, yeah, what government claim was simply utopic. There's no people on the street like actively on like different portfolios from lower income classes, because yeah, there's nothing around them that triggers this claim has like no backed up evidence. We also give capital capital to actually do that. And yeah, so yeah, comparatively under our side, the investment that you get are low risk. You get a higher likelihood for stability for these lower peer status quo. You have more accessibility for financial protection, even for the people that are from lower communities. The people who never get financial literacy or education, they can still live in a secure life, so regardless of their privilege they have or the education that they got. While under their side, only the privileged people within poor people who somewhat know financial literacy gets their impact, which is probably like 10% of them. We allocate these people funds into things that are more clear and secure to lift the burden of responsibility for them, rather than the uncertainty they will face in the free market when they're like alone. So yeah, simply we just give these people accessibility towards this investment, towards the government actually like, yeah, managing it, like, yeah, given all the reason above, so proud.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. Before we continue, just a kind reminder that this is live stream, and I would like to remind you guys to be more sensitive towards generalization of middle to lower income people, because for some it might be very sensitive. So for next speeches, please do be more aware of what you guys trying to explain when it comes to um, these type of people. Yeah. Yeah, with that being said, continuing on to close the case coming from opposition, Oprep, here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, audible.
Okay. Yep. Wait. There's like a kid in the library. Sorry. Yep. I'm gonna try speech in 3, 2, 1. I think there are three clashes in this debate that you should wait on. The clash on, does the government have the capability to do it, or like the second, it's just like which decision is going to be good. Will the decision be good or not? The last one is going to be the pragmatic effects of both worlds. The first one on the clash, then here's a contradiction that I'm gonna point out. PM tells you that it is going to be good investment because like people have good financial capability or like financial literacy, and then Whip tells you that it is going to be realistic, it is going to be low investment, etc., so you can kind of like control it. Firstly, how do we try and we flip both of them? First, even if we go with PM, we tell you that clerks doesn't have enough manpower to look over stocks every single hour for every single individuals who have different stocks, which means they cannot sustain this. Secondly, even if we go with Whip, nonetheless, it is better for you, which is said by Aline, to have more people understanding and studying and giving checks and balances to give government bonds more profit in order for them to account for inflation, compared to having more people needing to be hired in order for individuals to have more personalization, which can probably lower how the profit. Like the fact that people study how economic works, or like how these kind of things can like be sustained. I think it's just better for you to do that and focus on that for many of the clerks. The second clash is going to be, will this decision be good or not? Their main claim was like, people have financial literacy, right? We kind of like debunk the whole financial literacy First, the good digital economic literacy isn't vivid for many underprivileged families because they most likely are underprivileged and live paycheck to paycheck who uses BPJS. Just that they do peer-to-peer lending like Credipo because they need constant money to sustain their livelihood because like need to sustain their livelihood, right? But then secondly, the fact that Judol is a normalization within Indonesia uh, means that the normalization is that people might because people can personalize means that people might be able to like pull out the money that they have to do judo because like they want to do these kinds of things and like they need money to like I want to win big like the ads to do so. But then thirdly, the reason why this is true is because the perception of time for people is very distorted. That is to say, people might not understand what is going to be a long-term pension fund or like how many money or like how much money do you need in order for a long-term pension fund to actually sustain you until you die at the very old age. This is why it's going to be hard for underprivileged people to somewhat control the way their pension funds go. Lastly, we're gonna talk about the pragmatic impacts of both worlds. Here's the thing. PM's burden was simple. Investment from government gives low profit, which gives loss towards individuals, which means that government needs to prove that they can give more profit for more individuals to account for inflation. But then Whip suddenly said that they can personalize it easily because it won't be high risk and it will be low risk because people can choose which bonds they want to invest in to be realistic. This is where the burden isn't answered under their situation, where low risk equals to you. Then we tell you that it is better individually, where people don't worry that much on what they need to personalize, etc., because they can just be more free and focus on like their family and like loving their kids. I guess here's a slight minor harm though. Refer back to the second clash. People might just take their jehate funds, which means the benefit of for long term when you take money is going to be much more longer and harder for you to achieve. Comparatively, it is more rational under our side, where Gabby's mechanism was giving a big safety net even if they need emergency fund. People can still get emergency fund from jehate if they suddenly get laid off from jobs. This is tell you. First, we have an emergency fund if people need it. It isn't restricted at all. But then secondly, we prove to you that it is better under both metrics. So proud to oppose.
All right. Thank you very much for that speech. To close the entirety of this debate, I call upon Gov Rep here.
Okay, wait, give me a second to set up timer because we only have one phone. Okay. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, notice the humongous logical fallacy on their side. They claim the Indonesian people are financially illiterate enough to make the wrong decisions on curated stock portfolios made for different risk levels, yet are able to somehow manage those assets themselves because they can't put more into jehate, even though that should require financial literacy. If that's not enough to air with side proposition, I'm going to analyze the clashes. Since this is an economical motion, I'm going to discern how both sides fulfill the interests of the actors, which we framed on our side. Since LO said they agree with our characterization on those actors, I'm going to go with that characterization. So first of all, the most important, of course, is government. They want to lessen the burden of APBN and ensure a circulating economy. However, in order to choose which side actually wins this, we're going to have to see how both sides handle the two other actors, the majority of Indonesians and the most vulnerable. First actor on majority of Indonesians. They only give us two arguments talking about financial illiteracy, which we preempt since the first speaker, and on scams, I'm going to dismantle both once again. First of all, on the likelihood of financial illiteracy. Opposition says that they are illiterate because overall education is poor and technology is not widely spread yet. Yes, we do say that education is indeed poor, which we conceded, and that's exactly why we never talked about why education is the main source for these people actually learning about financial decisions. We talk about how they actually learn from this is from social media and day-to-day experience of actually using apps like Curious, GoPay, Shopee Pay, Bibit, etc. Now, on the second point on technology is not widely spread yet, we say to you that the whole point of COVID-19 was to push for digitalization. Maybe opposition still thinks that people outside of Java is 20 years behind, but that's not the case. Even people way outside in Papua now have access to Chromebooks, to the internet. But even if they are talking about the people in the most rural tribal communities, these communities are already generally detached from the formal job system. We can't picture why they would use JHT in the first place. It's outside of the scope of the motion. So what happens actually in opposition's world to the majority of Indonesians. They put their money into the government. They think it's safe. We tell you that sure, it might be safe, but exactly why it's not working. The whole goal of the majority of Indonesians is to secure a pension fund and likelihood that will protect them. In status quo, it doesn't happen because they only go to safe bonds which can't beat inflation. Now, what happens on government side? Even if they don't understand stocks, they understand their income and a very bare risk assessment. We give them a choice to pick the stocks they choose based on their income. Now, their second argument on scams. Now, it's an argument on their side. They say that people on social media can scam and give untrue information. First of all, we already say that it's in the influencer's interest to give true information as true as possible. But even if they do give untrue information, it is more dangerous on their side. Why is this? Because on their side, only a set percentage is into the safe JHT. The rest of them, they have to manage themselves, meaning if they are financially illiterate, like on their side, they are going to be more likely to fall into scams on the assets they have to manage themselves. On our sides, even if they are illiterate, they are less likely to fall into scams because they would choose to trust the government and choose a package with a high return. It is safer because it is managed by the government rather than an illiterate actor like they talk about. In an illiterate actor that they talk about. Now, if they are illiterate, most likely in the middle to upper class because they have the option to like education, like what they say. We give them the choice to just stick to the default and status quo, and they can also choose to put more into JHT if they want to. But in both sides, the upper to middle class don't actually change anything. So how does our side answer the burden? Panels, check your notes on our mechanism. We already state that we add options for more aggressive bonds. We can give an option for a higher return, which can actually combat inflation if they have the risk portfolio. On our side, the best case is that they are actually able to combat inflation. But on their side, the best case is nothing changes because if government bonds can actually suddenly combat inflation, spoiler alert, they can't judge us, then it's still better on our side because we stop the completely black box system and make it more transparent. So clearly on the illiteracy of a financial, we win on both cases. But what's important here, the tipping point here is on the most vulnerable. Opposition, they don't talk about how they are protecting the most vulnerable and most illiterate people. What we do on government is we give them a withdrawal trigger. If they do get hit by disaster, they can opt out and save themselves. We are the side that protects the most vulnerable and are actually transparent. Please err with side proposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. That marks the end of the high school grand finals. Congratulations, everyone. Now, me and my panels will deliberate, and the announcement, if I'm not mistaken, will be taken place tomorrow. So yeah, best of luck, everyone, and you may leave the Zoom meeting. Thank you. For judges, yeah, extra room one, yeah. Thank you.
To all high school teams who have today's high school grand final round, we would like to give our greatest gratitude to all of the respected judges and distinguished participants for the wonderful event. We would also like to apologize if there are any errors in our words, actions, or shortcomings during this grand final round. Additionally, I would like to inform all participants that the closing ceremony will be held tomorrow. We highly encourage your attendance as the final announcement of results will be delivered during the closing ceremony. Please ensure your punctuality. Thank you. And now, all of the high school teams may leave the Zoom meeting now. For all the teams who proceed to the grand final round for the varsity category, we would like to remind all the teams to stand by as the grand final round is going to start soon. Thank you.
Hi, I assume that I'm audible. Before we proceed with the randomizing the position for the grand final for varsity, I would like to do a quick roll call first. Binus, are you here and complete?
Here and complete.
Okay, thank you. Unut, are you here and complete?
Yep, we're here and complete.
Okay, great. So we can just get started then with the randomizing. As you can see here, your name is already stated in the box. I will click the randomizer and the team that would be given the name team 1 would be the government and team 2 would be opposition. We'll get started now. Okay, so group 1 is Unut. Unut will be the government and Binus will be the opposition. I'm going to just directly confirm the site in the tab and then after that we will release the draw with a sec, yeah? Thank you.
Dumpity-dee. If you are wise, you'll listen to me. Dear Lumpa land is both luscious and green, but not conducive to growing the bean. My job was guarding what little we got. You came along and pinched the lot.
Hey, why didn't you say something?
Well, perhaps I drifted off. Oompa, loompa, dumpa-dee-day. When I awoke, they sent me away. I'm disgraced, cast out in the cold, till I've paid my friends back 1,000-fold.
1,000-fold? You gotta be kidding me!
I repeat, 1,000-fold.
did it. He did it. SD's a friend of mine. We meet up every Tuesday night for dinner and a glass of wine. SD's been losing sleep. Her husband's acting different and it smells like infidelity. She says that ain't my Merlot on his mouth. That ain't my jewelry on our joint account. No, there ain't no doubt. I think I'm gonna call him out. She says, I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. No, nobody, no crime, but I ain't letting up until the day I die. I think he did it. No, he did it. SD wasn't there Tuesday night at Olive Garden, at her job or anywhere. He reports his missing wife, and I noticed when I passed his house, his truck has got some brand new tires, and his mistress moved in, sleeps in SD's bed and everything. No, there ain't no doubt. Somebody's gotta catch him out, 'cause I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. I think he did it, but I just can't prove it. No, nobody, no crime, but I ain't letting up until the day I die. I think he did it. He did it. Good thing my daddy made me get a boating license when I was 15, and I've cleaned. Think she did it, but they just can't prove it. She thinks I did it, but she just can't prove it. No, nobody, no crime. I wasn't letting up until the day. No, nobody, no crime. I wasn't letting up until the day. No, nobody, no crime. I wasn't letting up until the day he died.
All right. Welcome to the grand final round of the Varsity for ALSA Ecom. I'm pretty sure everyone should know the heading for the final round. It will be law. Oh my god, so surprising. All right, so there will be some context slides on this. First, context slide. Restorative justice refers to a legal approach that centers the restoration of relationship and community harm caused by an offense, prioritizing reconciliation between offender, victim, and community, and the reintegration of the offender over punitive consequence. In its adoption, Indonesia draws its concept of restoration from Pancasila and local custom, which are centered on communal harmony and relationship repair as the primary goal of dispute resolution. Indonesia currently applies restorative justice in a limited capacity, restricted to minor offenses like petty theft, minor assault, and traffic accidents. Context number 2. For the purposes of this debate, indefinite extrajudicial detention refers to the detention of individuals suspected of affiliation with organized criminal groups without the requirement of formal criminal charges, public trial, or fixed sentencing periods. Such detention may be authorized through executive or emergency powers outside ordinary criminal procedure. And again, if there's no question, sorry, I forgot to ask that before, but if there's no question on the second context slide as well. Third context slide. Forum non-convenience, or FNC, is a common law doctrine that allows a court to dismiss a lawsuit if there is a more appropriate and adequate forum, or a court, in another country for plaintiff to refile in the more appropriate place. In current context, FNC request is usually granted by the jurisdiction after weighing between private factors, e.g. ease of access, evidence and witness location, etc., and public factors, local interest, etc. Currently, FNC is not used uniformly as different common law states acknowledges different interpretation of it, while states adopting civil law uses their own standard of cross-state case dismissal. A bit complex, but very simple point. There's no questions regarding this. I'm going to move towards the motion. Motion 1, this House believes that the wider adoption and scope expansion of restorative justice is within the interests of Indonesian society. Motion 2, this House believes that states facing existential organized crime threats should permit indefinite extrajudicial detention of suspected cartel and mafia affiliates. And motion 3, this House would universally and uniformly recognize forum non-convenience in cross-border private disputes. I let everyone kind of take and consume the motion's context and the motion itself first for a few seconds. I hope you guys can understand it quite nicely and hope we can have a great debate. Yeah, if there's no questions, and if there are, please ask in the group, WhatsApp group as well. 30 minutes starting now. Good luck.
Thanks, Ka. Second, for EL, who have seen through so much of my breakdowns, especially sampai tadi pagi jam crashing over about weird assignments that clash with this tournament schedule either way. Um, pronounce she, her, POI preference unmute. Trigger warning if I have any sensitive I will have some sensitive language in my speech, so that only represents that is only used for the purpose of the debate and does not represent my personal opinion. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to start with like any usual law motion. Is that the first framing is that structural failure in status quo. First, courts are inaccessible within the status quo, as it is expensive to go to court to settle crimes for specifically marginalized communities, where the legal institution as an entity are understaffed and unable to handle all the backlog of cases that come from local and provincial level up until just central. Second, prisons not fully rehabilitate people as it is meant to be, because the moment they enter bars, they receive societal death, even if the crimes they committed are minor offenses, because this is the preventable second level punishment. Second, what are we talking when we say the wider adoption and scope? It doesn't mean that all criminal cases would use restorative justice. It's fair to coin that, not all. Horrible crimes with killing or forced degree murder with intent and planning, actus reus and mens rea, premeditated, judges would know that these cases aren't enough with restorative justice and would keep them into the court and the legal system because it's planned and executed. And that's fair for us to say because it's aligned with the concept of mens rea and actus rea, the very foundation of law. So restorative justice isn't very necessary in that specific case of first-degree murders. So this is the visualization or the mechanism. First, this works as a supporting mechanism, not to replace the role of legal institution. This means that a wider adoption would look like the scope of restorative justice is widely accepted by society as a form of seeking justice. In the presence of institutional lag, we say the space for radical reformation is marginal, but it doesn't fully close the possibility for innovation and further efficiencies to cater to the most vulnerable. Second, we take the step further by addressing the secondary punishment that one might receive. First, the people who can get away with crimes where petty theft happens because they have the means to escape from it. This means paying off victims or giving out hush hush money, which often becomes the norm and institutionalized corruption in the current form, where the restorative justice is still largely informal due to the lack of wide adaptation and scope of expansion. These cases never see daylight in court. For example, you as an anak DPR run over someone with your mercy, then you get away with just paying that. Second, the minority who aren't able to access the resources and legal accessibility when they do commit these crimes. This means that the people without the means to do restorative justice are the ones that are subject to the most harsh secondary punishment. Their attendance in court matters for their ability to work in the future and presence in their own community. The time they could have spent working to feed the people they depend on, the mental resources that are draining when you have to face the perpetrators of the crime again and again in multiple court sessions because it is obligation. Third is from the result of the court, where you lose out on resources that could have been leveraged for their own well-being and their contribution towards society in that resources. Third, that this is only done when all three parties agree on the approach towards restorative justice. So this means that crimes with identifiable mens rea and actus rea aspects are more likely not going to go through restorative justice because there's a clear intent and clear action that was planned beforehand, identifiable by the court, the judges, and the lawyers. This means that cases are going to go through are the ones that are accidental, minor, or even marginal. What this expands to 4 layers. First, that there has to be a consensus between the parties, and the power is then held onto the victim who is the most impacted by the crime, whether they think that the society is ready for dispute resolution as a mediator and with law as a moderator. This means that the legal institution can be more holistic in how they approach the case, where they do not fully rely on the books but allow morality to take over as a member of society who has seen another hurt as a result of a crime. Third, agency is returned towards the victim and the perpetrator to decide in consensus with the law on how to best approach this case, whether it will be the social service with rehabilitation process or other mechanisms such as monitoring when they are let go by the court and reintegrated into society as a whole. Fourth, monitoring and prevention of repeated harm is minimized for the reason that the perpetrator do receive and is subject to public scrutiny that is twofold or more as compared to being behind a prison bar in a hostile environment, which makes it hard to reintegrate back into society. This is exclusive to minor crimes because these people with the most minor crimes receive the large amount of punishment, which is unprecedented. Where you, as a convict for 3 years for stealing a mango from your neighbor, you can't even get a job in Indomaret because they screen you for your criminal record of SKCK. One simple preemption, they might say restorative justice is a legal approach. In Indonesia, the status quo, we have a lot of restorative justice, but it's always informal, through informal settlement. Anak DPR bayar duit terus cabut. But the benefit of Gov is when we implement it, it becomes more normalized and common through institutions. Now you have more incentive to take this to court when rich perpetrators try to buy themselves out, right? Three really simple arguments. First, the institutionalism of restorative justice being normalized. First is the emphasis on restorative justice being a legal approach. In Indonesia, in status quo, we have a lot of restorative justice, but it's always informal through informal settlements. But the benefit of government is when we do really implement it, it becomes more normalized. And so it will be in a legal framework where the defendants, judges will view these deals rather than the backroom deals that happen in the status quo without the normalization. So people who do these minor crimes who are faced with court don't have to rely on Hotman Paris and the virality of their case to be able to go through with it, right? Second argument is being equitable to crimes of necessity or marginalized communities. First, the urgency is that there are marginalized communities who do crimes of necessity to feed their children, to clothe themselves, but the status quo is very inequitable towards them to instantly put them in court where they cannot defend themselves with lawyers from private firms to win their case. Whereas victims have more power to put them to prison because they have more monetary capacities. There are so many cases where Nene Churi Manga because she couldn't get any food and then they ended up being imprisoned. Second, restorative justice in the status quo also cannot work because it's too in opposition cannot work because it's too picky. There's a lot of cases that do go to trial without going to restorative justice, so that these marginalized communities do not suffer that big of a harm at the end of the day. I think, and then thirdly, I think this is a really the most important one. It's especially on activism and the crack of this tent, because in the world of democracy, activists on opposition are the most often in the first line to be subjected under scrutiny to some random crime they did not do because the government painted them to be anarchists and such because they were demoing against Klapa Sawit or against harmful mining practices. Where the activists in the front line of actions are somehow seen as a threat towards the state, and that state has all the rights to subject the same punishment as a first degree murder, which is like they disappear off the face of the earth, and you don't see their faces in jail or in court. And the result is usually jail and create social death for these activists as well. The impact is that there is deterrence for future activism and allows for governmental manipulation and opposition. On the other hand, the scope of restorative justice is widened for activists. At least now they have better autonomy to settle without getting punished horrendously like murderers and rapists in principle because it's unfair. Ops world creates a horrible deterrence effect that comes in two layers. First, jailing activists make other activists scared to continue activism, meaning injustice flourish regardless because you do not let them space to talk it out, or at least give them the autonomy or the agency to be able to communicate that. Second, activists are more likely to fear and submit to injustice, becoming the people they want to protest because they know the only other option is jail time, which creates a secondary punishment that they want to avoid. For them, it's easier to conform and for that proud to propose.
Right, thank you, Prime Minister, for that fine speech. To open the case for opposition, calling upon Leader of Opposition here.
Hi, okay, give me a few seconds. Okay. Before I start my speech, I'd like to take my time thanking everyone who's helped us gotten this far in GF. It's been an incredible time debating in ALSA. Thank you for all the staffs and the incredible adjudicators who, managed this whole entire competition. And shout out to my teammates, Bintang and Bay. I love you guys. Okay, and shout out to my coach as well. Sorry, thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The lack of characterization coming from PM's speech destroys their entire case. I'd like to talk about 3 things. Number 1, even if Indo CGS is quite corruptive, I think the government has already provided installments of maybe free lawyers, for instance, or public service lawyers that normal citizens can actually assess in the very first place. So the idea that lawyers are expensive and lawyers are this and that are quite not really engaging with the status quo, because in the status quo, there are already quite much more like public services and free services of lawyers, so people can still access this in a general sense. That means that people most often have the idea and accessibility to access to bigger courts, right? But second, I think what we want in UP is quite simple. We want a more traditional court process with little to no mediation as long as possible, right? But thirdly, we think that, I'd like to define a bit of things here. The word perpetrator means that people who disobey law and takes the legitimate autonomy of other people. It means that you're probably going to harm other people in the process of doing so, which means that we can if we can deny the fact and negate the fact that these things are justifiable because of the fact that you literally harm other people in that process, we can still win on the matter of principles in this debate, right? But secondly, we think like there's a lot of bad like CGS system. I think we agree that this is the current status quo, maybe in like Indonesia and all these things, because there's things like corrupted officials and like who take money from state citizens. But I think the problem here is that micro criminality doesn't only mean to things like petty theft. It looks like things like domestic violence. It looks like to things like in relationships or abuse in families. Goes far more to that extent and far more harms the citizens of people and general citizens like in the very case. But I'd like to talk about two things and two rebuttals then coming from PM speech. I think number one, what they talk about is that, oh, restorative justice doesn't cater to like a lot of people because that's not because of the expansion that does not exist. Three things here. Number one, the problem here is not the expansion or which approach is taken to. I think we can agree that elitists and oligarchs will still persist in the current status quo because Indonesia has a failing democracy rate, right? That means that all these things like big crimes and things like corruptions will still persist in the current status quo. The problem here is simple, is that they think that the expansion would institutionalize this in a furthermore, but this is still bad because people can still buy their way in. This doesn't change the current status quo at all. But thirdly, if we can also explain to you why in our arguments, then like perpetrators get much more bigger loosening, it would worsen the act of law within their side. I have two cases here first. First, then, I want to talk about how uniquely the Indonesian citizens are characterized. Three things here under my speech is that one, they are probably very skeptic of a lot of things that happens in the CGS system. But B, they have a lot of cultural narratives flowing and reinforced that affect CGS to the very instance. For instance, things like religious narratives that tell you to forgive other people, to tell you to forgive your perpetrator, or instances like collective ideas and collective narratives that pretty much pushes the usage of one person to society. So for instance, if your perpetrator is someone who is significantly important in society, then therefore you're pushed to like maybe stay silent because this person has contributed much more to that collectivist society and probably has helped the society far more better than you, right? So there's this distant urge for Indonesian citizens to basically shut up victims at the very least, right? In this case, that's what's currently happening in the status quo. Why then does reconciliatory approach therefore further harms this? It's because of three things. As a number one, victims do not have the amount of bargaining power to speak what they want or speak what they need in restorative justice processes, because restorative justice processes doesn't happen ultimately in court. So there's a lack of check and balance persisting in all of these matters, right? Within their side, maybe handling domestic violence cases would look like talking in cafes and mediating the victims to actually forgive their perpetrators, but it's most likely not pure. Because second, we think that number one, there's like a lack of check and balance in that process itself. But number two, cultural narratives are more likely to step down to the victim, and most often they can't really persist what they want to say. But thirdly, it most likely worsens the criminality because perpetrators already pushed by cultural narratives that defend their state of criminality is now pushed by the safety net that they can just mediate and get away with their mistakes. And this is horrible in the far land because of two impacts. Number one, within pro, you're most likely to worsen this narrative and most likely to worsen the instances of like restorative of CGS in the Indo society. What is that? What does that look like? It looks like maybe like, I don't know, like people who hit their wives feeling like as if they can get away with all these issues because of the idea that mediation can be persistent and is generally accessible. But second, it most likely is going to worsen the like criminality in lower classes. Their unique idea is that lower class people can get away with or like people who lack people who lack general care for the state basically has the right to actually do these criminals. I have three things here. One, a crime is still a crime. It's still gnarly at some sense. You're most likely going to impose harm on other people. Let's say, for instance, I'm hungry. I want to rob like bread out of Bintang's bag or all of these things. He's most often going to face the impact of my actions. Therefore, it is still unjustifiable for these people to do so. But second, I think I have a unique stance of this, is that it worsens corruption within their side of the house because most often people are still going to like maybe buy into these things better because there's no big check and balances. But second, I think that it also causes, I think that as a democratic country, Indonesia is most often needs like general participation, which means that it also depends, like the prosperity of the country most often depends on the things that and actions that the Indonesian society does in the very first place. So if you give easier access for these people to do these crimes, you're most often not only going to worsen it, you're most often going to harm democratic like participation. Because right now, even in the most micro things, you cheat and you lie and you don't get further accountability and all these things. That's why, for instance, through like things like corruptions foster even further, because when these people maybe, for instance, get placed in parliament or get amount of money, they're still going to instill this type of culture and narrative that they can get away with it, get rid of all the accountability that exists when you impose harm on other people. So therefore, there are two harms coming from opposition. As a number one, most often perpetrators get away with all these things and instances because of things like cultural narratives, which they fail to characterize, and religious narratives that often play a significant impact in Indo culture. But second, rates of criminality exist far worse within their side, and the quote-unquote expansion is pretty much a bad idea because we think that the government and state failure still exists. Maybe there's still a lot of elites that can still buy their way in. For all these reasons that you must weigh opposition's benefits and ideas. So we're so proud to oppose.
Right. Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that fine speech. To continue the case from government, calling upon DPM for here.
Okay, beforehand, I would also like to thank my team and also Kajoka for mentoring us basically. POIs through chat, and so sorry if there are any sensitive topics. It's only for the debate. And I'm sorry I cannot open my camera right now because my Wi-Fi is bad enough. Oh, and also let me know if I cut off because, like I said, my Wi-Fi is already bad enough. Okay, so I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's take a look at opposition's case for a minute. Firstly, they talk about how free public services are accessible enough, which is why they should just go to punitive court. Opposition doesn't know how it works in Indonesia then, because we are not in America. In Indonesia, the way it works is not that the government provides mandatory free lawyer, but the courts allow you to apply to get free lawyer from LBH or Lembaga Bantuan Hukum. So this is why this is not enough. First, there is an application process, so it takes time. Secondly, there are lots of applicants already. And thirdly, even if you are accepted, your free lawyer from LBH has a lot of other cases as well, meaning they cannot fully focus on your case, leading to ineffective legal representation that makes marginalized people at a disadvantage, especially in law. And then secondly, they keep talking about how microcrimes also don't just look like picking up mangoes, but also looking like domestic violence and how that cannot really be mediated enough. But I think that we can flip this because in the status quo, victims sering refuse to report because they know that the punitive system will just lead to their partner being jailed, which means losing the household's primary breadwinner. And then they can also face social stigma, especially if you're in kampung and your neighbors are super gossipy, especially when you go to jail, and that partner can either return from prison even more violent or cannot fall back into society at all. This is why we want to expand restorative justice so that the victim can get legally bound mediations without hurting the family. And the preamp on them saying that it's still not enough justice because it's basically just talking the issue out. Note that under our side, since the adoption is widened in the nation, that it will be institutionalized. I'll talk about this later on more, but it will be institutionalized with, for example, preconditions like formal admit to harm, victim right to veto the process, etc. That is written on paper. Plus, Indonesian communities are close-knit anyway, so the social check is far more powerful than relying on parole officers. So victims don't get any justice. There's a difference because we give them a shot, but in your side, you shoot them down. Now, what does the Indonesian legal system currently look like as my argument, right? It looks like more burdened by punities than, for example, like community healing. Because why is community healing important? For all layers, first, with Indonesia in context, social life is very, very communal. for example, the glorification of the term gotong royong, right? Especially in pedesaan. And since our laws reflect our national stance, a crime is seen as legal violation that destabilize every layer of the collective. So what does this look like? A, in the current punitive system, the victim has to go through bureaucratic process that is first sees them as a piece of evidence, basically, not as a person, and secondly, not guarantee them the restoration of safety. How will this look like with restorative justice then? We want to replace the victim's fear with agency, because especially in a nation that is so filled with social stigmatization and neighbor gossiping, so they get restitution, but also community healing in the form of public acknowledgement of the harm that they suffered. And thirdly, preemptive on restorative justice, only giving informal settlements, like I've said before in my rebuttals. The benefit on Gov is that actually the institutionalization and standardization of these resolutions, because in the status quo, when restorative justice scope is limited, communities already engage in informal or unregulated settlements anyway, out of necessity to either avoid issues or economic need of formal courts. The issue with the status quo then is that these settlements lack oversight, especially when it is dominated by powerful local figures, or the defendants that are more rich than them, basically, with no legal protection if the offender, for example, breaks their promise. However, under our side, then, we want to bring these deals to be overseen with formal paper trails to make sure that restoration contract is legally binding, that protects the right of both victim and defendant, but at the same time still being cheap and easy to access. So what's the mechanism here? Sure, the settlement can be as simple as a deal, but under our side, the settlement then will be subjected to state-regulated mediation protocols, for example, and there is proof that the offender violates an agreement, if the offender violates an agreement. So if the state does have evidence of the violation, for example, then the jurisdiction can default them back into the punitive system. So no, we are not completely erasing the possibility of jail, for example. So how does this look like for the defendant then? Three things. Firstly, since community healing is very in linked with social stigma and opinions, this humanizes the harm of their actions, making it much harder for the offender to rationalize their crime in the future. But also, secondly, at the same time, allowing the offender to still be able to earn back their place in society. For example, even like my first speaker have said before about being an Indomaret cashier, but you have to submit SKCK, but you keburu pernah go to jail because you stole some apples from the wrong people. And thirdly, we want to protect actors in crimes of necessity. My first speaker have already talked about this, but also legal safeguard for social activists, for example, who I think can be seen as one of the best examples of punitive overreach victims. For example, in the status quo, the law is sering banget dipakai weaponized against those people who engage in civil obedience, like for example, barricading a mining as a protest. But then they are put in jail as if their political dissent is the same as violent crimes or like murder. So why the activist needs to be protected? Because without activists, this will just minimize future activism, and also society are easier to submit to corruption. So now, lastly, what does this look like for the community then, especially in the context of Indonesia as a nation? Indonesia is not a socially flat country, since it is a society with hundreds of ethnic groups, multiple religions, strong regional identities, etc., etc. But especially with historical wounded places like Papua, Ambon, and other post-conflict areas that has more like displacement and long-term social trauma. This matters because in such a diverse society, crime is often not just interpreted as like an individual versus an individual act, right? But as a group versus group offense. For example, if like a Christian guy with a Muslim guy has fought, then it can be seen as a religious hate crime rather than an individual, especially since our country is very filled with micro racism and harmful news headlines. Opposition's punitive world is bad because it often intensifies this like group logic, because when the state arrests and punishes one side, the offender's community may feel like, oh, that means that the legal system is biased against their religion or like their race, etc. Meanwhile, the victim's community may feel like the only way for the government to like be fair to them is to give harsh punishment. So under government's side, we win because we are better in restorative justice, forcing the conflict back down to the level of human harm and human repair. Proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that fine speech. To continue the case for opposition, call upon the
Okay. Thank you. Oh yeah, I would like to say my thank yous as well. Like Joy has already represented most of what I'm going to say, but like thank you to Joy, thank you to Bay, thank you to my coaches, Kaaya, and also Binusian seniors, and also thank you to DRL. Okay, starting now, it is not enough for a resolution to be impartial. It must be seen as impartial because there's a reason why plea deals in Indonesia are not implemented because we, as a collective Indonesian society, realize and demand that justice must be served to end through the public, not backdoors and to reach a petty settlement. I have three clarifications first. Number one, normalization does not equate to institutionalization. Other than the fact that they have no fiat and it's an assertive explanation, they just say, oh, it's suddenly going to be institutionalized. There's no mention of it in the info slide, by the way. It's not institutionalization because that ruins the whole point of restorative justice. The point of doing it is to privately do it between the victim and the perpetrator, plus having a mediator moderating all of the circumstances that you go through. Not going through institutions means you involve other actors, then that kills the whole point about lawyers. That's no longer restorative justice, that's retributive, which exactly our point is talking about. Restorative justice, by definition, is an out-of-court settlement. So institutionalization isn't a valid claim for them to take into account under their side of the house. If you want a systematic likelihood as to why this is likely, use their example of being resource heavy. If the fact that Indonesia law system is already resource heavy and there's so much cases to handle, just like what they mentioned, then government does not have every incentive to institutionalize this because you're adding 200,000 additional cases to the mouth of judges to feed through. Therefore, it's invalid for them to claim the benefit of institutionalization. No explanation, even if that's true, judge. Remember, if they want institutionalization, then for every harm regarding law they push to us, apply to them as well. It's simply a false definition. Second of all, we have restorative justice for minor offenses. Remember, their side argues for an expansion, not for an elimination under our side of the house. Under our side, cases of petty crimes such as stealing mangoes, crimes out of necessities, can still be resolved under our side of the house. Like suddenly, if you crash into someone's house using your motorcycle, their side needs to argue the expansion of definition to which you can use restorative justice. Things like corruption, abuse, harassment to go out of court. That's the thing. Third of all, their extension about like Muslims and Christians will villainize each other is invalid. We can fully determine who is the perpetrator and fully determine who is the victim. Therefore, under the areas of the house, they're not claiming any of their benefits. Moving on, they say that courts are expensive because lawyers are expensive. They also say we are not we are not USA or like United States of America. Three responses actually. Number one, we agree. We agree with DPM that we are not US with common law. Indonesia operates on civil law where judges are inquisitorial rather than adversarial. What does that mean? Listen to this ball knowledge. It means that judges determine evidences, actively seeking questions to the witnesses, and do the process of court. Therefore, there's a lower bar of privilege to seep into minorities and underpin these minorities as a whole because lawyers play a lesser part because it's mostly moderated by the judge who are neutral, and if it's corrupt, then it applies to both sides of the house. Therefore, it's an invalid thing to say that it's expensive because the expensive part barely is involved to the process of how you get your justice. We don't mind it takes a long time, by the way, because it's not every day you deal with the papers and administration. It's every few months after there has been an update regarding the evidence gathering. So the opportunity cost that PM is arguing for isn't that bad. Are you going to court every day? No, it takes a year, but you don't go through that 365 times a year because law, and like we don't mind because law in and of itself is a specified manner. You are determining specific punishments. Therefore, it's just for you to take a long time because you're literally determining the lives of individuals. It's valid under our side of the house. Number two, they say it's expensive. No, it's not. Like they have said, oh, LBH, RVZ, blah, 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 blah. You have access to public lawyers with pro bono services and volunteers like LBH Jakarta providing justice services dispersed into specific areas. So not just LBH Jakarta. You literally have LBH in Palu, in Manado, in Kalimantan Timur. I don't know if Bay has that in Philippines, but yeah, like That's what I'm trying to say. There's an active attempt with this because we have an oversupply of law students from universities having an active incentive to disseminate regarding law. It's imperfect, but it is always growing because, as they said before, Indonesia is a collectivist society with gotong royong values. That means every single reason for that, we have every incentive to back each other up as a law student, as a person who knows the law, to back each other up whenever we are struggling. That's why in cases of like activists struggling in jail, LBH Jakarta frees them up because it's out of collectivist values for Indonesians to do. So that's the second response. No, it's a negation on being expensive. Third of all, it's more privileged because you don't get representation at all. Remember the comparative judge. We have a lawyer, your side, you have no lawyer at all. You become your own lawyer and you are already told of narratives like non-professionalism that you should forgive. This will be bad for social cohesion. So everyone is forced to partake in this. This rebuts their burden push on becoming expensive and their benefit on agency, because agency only matters insofar as you can exert that agency into an appropriate manner. So it's not a pure principle, it's an asserted one. Second of all, they talk about how perpetrators are victim too. Number one, we already have outframed this. Number two, we still have mitigating and aggravating factors to consider even in courts. Like if you steal bread, your actus reus is lower because you do it out of self-defense and you have no other choice. This also applies to your CV, by the way. Like it won't harm your job because in your application, you're not like trigger warning a sex offender. If you are, then you deserve it because you are a part of the problem. Most likely petty cases of or crimes out of necessity is catered to under our side. Remember, they are arguing for the expansion. So what's our comparative then? Two things. Number one, we as an Indonesian society deserve accountability because we distrust the government and everyone is a victim. Case in point is if a case of harassment happens, if a case of corruption happens, it's not just the direct victim. It's all women who commute to KRL and in cubicles feeling unsafe the next day. Thus, everyone deserves it to see it through court via media scrutiny, via publicized papers. Their side keeps it backdoors. Number two, it's very, very prone to manipulation. They say it can be regulated, it can be institutionalized. Even if we were assumed to in being institutionalized, it's still very prone to manipulation because you come face to face with your perpetrator. It's easy for you to give in. It's easy for you to go through a process of petty settlement. If they expand this, then it becomes socially stigmatized to take law or like courts because you are dragging everyone for a due court process. Therefore, the expansion only creates coercion. It's not a good thing. Law isn't expensive. Remember, inquisitorial, adversarial. We take into account that. That's why you oppose. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, thank you, DLO, for that final remarks. To close the substantive part from government, we're calling upon government rep. Sugar.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Wait, hold on. Let me set up a timer. And am I visible by chance for being our debate mom and teaching us every day? So yeah. Starting my speech. Oops, sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. What does opposition mainly posit as a concern? I think they talk about institutionalism will not happen currently because that's one of the big burdens that we actually bring, but I'll tell you why it will happen. As restorative justice actually becomes more nationwide and more common and more people want to opt into it, then the government is pressured to standardize mediation rules, right, from media and etc. So they will standardize these mediation rules with, let's say, legal standards so outcomes are better consistent and mediators are not all judges as well. Because I think the main harm that government has posited, opposition has posited, is basically it's very, very resource heavy in the end. But we do not literally just take mediators from all judges, attorneys, and etc. But there are also legal personnel that actually is low cost and actually happens to be very trained itself, which are paralegals from the communities itself, which are lawfully trained. And so it's not that big of a resource burden when they are, of course, from the community. And at least there now, because there is formal paper trail and etc., creates stronger accountability and protection for the victims. And for example, for the victims within, let's say, unregulated informal settlements within the status quo itself. Now, when we broaden the scope, now when we have mediators itself, when we have paralegals, now there will be actual oversight, which are basically low resources itself, in which it can actually create a better standardized version of, let's say, institutional frameworks within the status quo. Secondly, if LBH are regional itself, then we can take over that in the process of wide scope of restorative justice as well, because we can, let's say, work together with LBN, etc., because they have conceded that we have resources. So our case will still run itself, and their harm basically fails. So what are the key insights that we bring, and why it's important to the debate? I think Bell and Tessa has told you several things. First is basically courts are currently inaccessible and unequitable within the status quo for marginal communities, which I do not really think that they have really opted towards our burden or our arguments itself, or try to mitigate it. They just said that, oh, basically there's LBH, which is regional, and etc., within that case to actually help these marginal communities, and we'll tell you why we overweigh them in that sense. Secondly, so what can we see, right? We have told you that major offenses will not be brought to restorative justice, for example, because there's premeditated murder, for example, trigger warning, rape, and etc. So it's fair for us to say that when there are extreme cases, when there is literally a high mens rea and actus reus that's basically very, very bad or extreme, yeah, a paralegal will know that restorative justice is not necessary to be used at the end, and of course we have to bring that to legal court and etc., or formal court in the end. And so why does the scope need to be expanded in itself, right, Judge? I think normalization creates people to opt to restorative justice, creating more institutionalism to get rid of backroom dealings, which is basically very prevalent in the status quo. Secondly, it's more equitable for marginalized communities that do crimes of necessity, and restorative justice for activists and etc. to have the autonomy to at least settle less than getting imprisoned just like murderers and rapists, which is in principle very, very disgusting within the end, right? And hence, when we look at all of this, it's basically harder for reintegrating for people that have done minor offenses or perpetrators like that, which are juveniles, for example, or them doing crimes of necessity, or basically activists. Now they're just put into court because there are a lot of corrupt people out there who put them into court and put them into jail, and etc. So let's see the clashes, right? I think the first metric is equitability of marginalized communities. And secondly is on the principle of the legal system itself. Let's go to the principles of the legal system itself. What is the narrative that they bring? I think they tell us that crimes are not just petty theft, but it's also like domestic violence. Perpetrators will get more loosening, especially when they can buy their way out, or there are power imbalances to shut victims up because the parties are involved that are usually more powerful, which creates a lack of check and balance because there's a power imbalance in the end, right? So let's look at the check and balance itself. Let's see the probability and weigh it, right? I think people buying themselves out is symmetrical on both sides, especially where trials that are very just corrupt in the end in Indonesia, right? So it's symmetrical. So the question is that how the status quo of these trials actually change to create a better check and balance to corruption within the first place, right? Their concern is that there will be more opportunities to bribe and get away from clients. But there are several things towards this. One, I think we have told you that major crimes will go to court procedures in the first place, so domestic abuse will come to court rather than restorative justice. We're not expanding the scope to that. And secondly, paralegals will also know that domestic abuse isn't just a petty crime to go through restorative justice. When there's high public scrutiny towards these crimes, and courts will be pressured to insert justice in the end, or paralegals will be ensured to pursue justice in the end when media is very, very prevalent within the status quo. At least we give better check and balance for the marginalized communities that generally did crimes of necessity, and perpetrators in these communities that do not have, and literally perpetrators in these communities do not even have the money to buy themselves out within the end, right? So of course then corruption cases will actually lessen within our case in the end, and comparatively then in opposition, you do not give agency to marginal communities, and corruption still happens either way. So what is the magnitude? At least government creates institutionalism, which the normalization is opted into, and into institutional frameworks much more. So we get rid of backdoor dealings that actually create worse power imbalances in the end without any judges or attorneys overseeing the matter itself. That's why anak orkai can pay their way out within the status quo itself, and we're trying to go against that in the end, right? And retribution against individual offenders. Retributive justice is already a part of the principle in CGS, which is proportionality, right? But in the scope of the status quo, it does not work at its maximum capacity. So we already settled from PM's mechanism that it is made under consensus and gives agency towards the victim to deem society ready or not to mediate the restorative justice in the end. So even more so when we say it's supporting, but does not replace when you can handle it on a local level with Kepala Desa as a mediator and such within the end. So let's see on the metric of equitability for marginalized communities. What do they say? I think the biggest narrative is basically the state already gives more free service of lawyers to access it for marginalized communities. LBH Jakarta through collectivist values will help the marginalized communities in the end. I think the probability of that is very, very low. Why? Because lawyers are not really that accessible towards marginalized communities. Lawyers actually come from the state are free, but they're very, very overworked in the end, and you cannot really get a good decision from, let's say, these lawyers, or basically good help from these lawyers, because they're very, very overworked with the amount of cases that they handle itself. So the only way for you to actually win a case or actually try to lower down your sentence to the max extent is basically having private lawyers itself, in which it is very, very expensive for marginalized communities in the end. So what do we talk about when we talk about vulnerability? Let's weigh it, right? On rehabilitation, I think we told you that we understand that the state is the reason why people do crimes in the first place, especially when it's crimes of necessity. So the state also needs to give solutions to restore the protection of these people. Opposition creates worse long-term social risks. Why? Because punitive systems often turn offenders into literal permanent social problems. Why? By making them do crimes again. How? By isolating them from work and etc. or their family and whatnot, which creates when offenders return from prison poorer and etc. and they have no way to work and are stigmatized. The only way they can actually survive is basically to reoffend itself, to actually steal again and etc. in the end, which they have not explained why this will not work in the end when you imprison, let's say, activists, when you imprison, let's say, people who do crimes of necessity. At least government's restorative justice model keeps offenders accountable through compensation or settlement and direct engagement with victims while preserving the social ties that actually reduce the future crimes itself, which literally means community healing itself. So this better serves the enriched society because restorative justice actually creates reintegration, which is currently missing within the status quo in itself. And I do think we have told you that basically the things about Christianity and Islam and etc. At least now we're actually boxing those problems within, let's say, a more standardized version or more, let's say, small version rather than just like putting it into court or etc. At least now we have parties that actually try to search for solutions together rather than just putting it to court and making it into a very big problem through media itself, which will create more polarization. And that's why we are very proud to propose.
Right, thank you, Government, for that nice speech. To close the substantive part of this debate, calling upon upward.
Okay. First of all, yeah, I would like to do a speech. Thanks to Joy and Bintang for being my day ones, yeah. And also to Kabatara, Ka Rachel, Ka Jen, and to all our coaches, and Ka Regina. We love you all so much, Venus community. Okay. My POI preference would be like to raise your hand. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Can I be able to forgive someone who sexually harassed me? Might be if I am a saint. But in most cases, definitely no. Therefore, when the law tells me to reconcile or for the sake of like social harmony, quote unquote, they are not giving me peace as a victim, but rather they are forcing this peace upon me. They are telling me that my trauma can be exchanged for a mere greater good. And in that silence, my shame grows. The offender, but rather the offender's power still remain. They can still walk around and be like, yeah, I sexually harass you, but who cares? They say that expansion of restorative justice is good because then there's going to be like a lot of check and balances, i.e., less likely for corruption to happen because right now it is expanded. But I think this is a very jumping of an analysis because one, with the characterization that Indo is already so messy, the law system is already messed up. This makes no sense as to why then suddenly expansion is suddenly going to better benefit a lot of people. Their main argument is contingent on the fact that legal help is still accessible, therefore, it is not a burden on resources. But the thing is, I think we already flipped this by Bintang's case that in Indonesia, these lawyers, yeah, they are accessible. However, they are still outnumbered and out-resourced by a lot of rich lawyers because even if the lawyer is free, the process itself is not evidence collection and like a lot of tests and things like that. It is still going to cost a lot of money. Therefore, you're not really going to win in that kind of messy situation. And secondly, they said that still government can provide a lot of free access that even if it takes a lot of time, the trade-off is going to be better. However, in cases of domestic violence or sexual harassment, time is going to be the death of these people because every day, the moment you try to slow down this process, these victims are already exposed to intimidation. They're exposed to family pressure to just drop the case because yeah, family reputation matters the most. Therefore, justice is delayed. When it happens, evidence are already going to be destroyed. They also mentioned that Indonesia is a democracy with, I don't know, check and balance. Activists can be able to speak up freely. But the thing is, in Indonesia, why do you have to rely for it to go viral even before you take action about it? Like the UE case, people did not dismiss the victims beforehand, even when it didn't, when it was not viral yet, right? But then when it became viral, just that's only when the justice have been given. However, I think this is not like the best way to be able to handle this, because these are just desperate cry of help of people, because the formal institution itself, the law itself, is already broken. What then is the main clash in this debate? I think the main clash here is that whether Indonesia can be able to safely and effectively deploy this restorative justice without worsening: one, elite capture; second, coercion, impunity, and a lot of institutional inequality, which is already happening in Indonesia. So what then Gov tries to bring us? They said that with widened and institutionalized restorative justice, there will be conditions like maybe victims can be able to veto it, and that the social check is more powerful. This is a lie, because one, when restorative justice becomes institutionalized and normalized, Bintang already responded how this will be like a victim and a perpetrator facing each other during doing private settlements and etc. But additionally, when institutionalized, now refusing reconciliation or restorative justice becomes socially unacceptable to people, because now victims are seeing that if they don't agree with this restorative justice, they are damaging the social harmony, they are disruptive, they are vindictive, and so on. And secondly, in Indonesia, many victims are economically dependent on their families, employers, or maybe their community, which means consent are not genuine in this side of the house, and that it is produced through pressure. Therefore, our side wins because we have proven you two things. One, restorative justice only works under high institutional trust and equality, which in this case Indonesia do not have. Meaning, people in power can compensate victims privately and pressure settlements. And secondly, this will only disproportionately benefit powerful offenders who have the resources rather than the ordinary victims. And in their side, the harms are going to be structural and irreversible. This is left unresponded until the very end of this debate. Therefore, if Indonesia were to apply this will lead to: one, victims are going to be pressured. Community leaders, families, for the sake of like, let it go, it's fine. For example, and secondly, the threat of being ostracized by the community itself. Because, for example, if like a good governor who helps people publicly suddenly SA'd you, people are gonna be like, still, this is if you speak up, it is not going to be good for our community. He's still doing a lot of good things, right? Therefore, Asians do value reputation over anything else. Therefore, public shame is more scary to them rather than justice itself. What then is the impact here? Something that I think they really failed to consider in this debate, because they failed to acknowledge that legal cynicism will worsen in Indonesia. So why is this bad? Because even now, we know that Indonesians already are skeptical of the law itself. They know that minorities have no power over the ruling elites, and that the law only caters to the richest. So they disassociate from the community, from the society, from the justice system itself. And if we allow restorative justice to happen, we are only silencing a lot of people to speak up, because now there is no media to scrutinize them, and the public doesn't know anything about it. Additionally, the trust of people with police system is already so blurred out. This is due to police brutality, right? Cases of that. Therefore, if the public perceives that the police are just another tool for those rich offenders or elites, they feel a moral obligation to take matters into their own hand, i.e. killing the perpetrators, maybe mobbing them, or harassing their family members. Once citizens bypass the state loses its control over violence. This leads to maybe rise of vigilantism, thuggers, and therefore they see the law as something useless. So what is the metric here? I think the proposition highlight isolated instances where maybe it is going to be successful, but judges, we must prioritize the high probability of systemic abuse following this implementation. We have proven this to you. The potential for elites to manipulate the system to evade accountability is very likely. And secondly, why do we prioritize offenders restoration over a literal victim's protection? The state owes its primary moral obligation to the victim themselves who was harmed, rather than the offender who actively chose to violate the law. Therefore, in these clashes, we directly won this debate. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Opposition Whip, for that fine speech. To start, to summarize this debate from opposition, call upon opposition reply.
Okay. Starting now, like the ALSA or COM always say, Hello, future champions. If you notice, there's a lot of inconsistencies in government's case. I have two inconsistencies other than the ones that maybe corruption and domestic violence in government whip still goes to court. If that's the case, then what are you expanding to? Because small offenses are catered to under our side of the house. And as the expansion goes, it becomes normalized and it is used by terrible actors as a scapegoat to run away from punishments, pushing for resolution after settlements by using narratives that you should forgive. Conclusion here so far. Like, maybe it's just me, but their case feels confusing. Like maybe I don't understand the law enough, but I don't get their urgency as to what they're trying to chase here. I just don't get what they want. So let's see what they actually said. They talked about the court being expensive because lawyers are expensive, and DPM said we're not US. We agree. We're not US because we are Indonesia with civil law that are not dependent on lawyers entirely. Judges are inquisitorial, not adversarial. What does that mean other than a jargon? It means that the lawyer it isn't heavily involved like a Better Call Saul episode where they convince the juries and like see this evidence. No, it's like the judge put punting the hammer and doing all of the major processes such as like interviewing the victims and seeing all the legitimate evidences. So it isn't as lawyer dependent. Number two, we already mitigated if the concerns are like that using their own characterizations. If Indonesians are that collectivist, then we are resourceful to create mitigating factors to like cater to these like insufficiencies in the civil systems. Therefore, like it's not that deep, it's not that bad. That's the first thing about expensive judges. So what's our case? It's not within the interest of Indonesians because of two things. Number one, it's very prone to manipulation. And we have characterized this beautifully since Joy about how it seeps in narrative of forgiveness, of communal identity, of religion. The only resolution to this clash is that they say there's institutionalization. But they have not explained. Let's just assume institutionalization works. Why does institutionalization resolve these issues? Because the manipulation happens psychologically. It happens when you face the perpetrator. It happens on a one-to-one scenario. They just say institutionalization means fairness. But what does that look like? The manipulation still happens on a deeper level. Under our side, at least you are represented by a lawyer. Therefore, they're able to mitigate these circumstances under our side of the house. Manipulation isn't prone to happen. And again, this happens through backdoors, by the way. Like, it's very difficult and it's an out-of-court settlement. That's the first thing. Number two, retributive justice is for public accountability. Because once a big crime happened, which is most likely the case because this is an expansion, not just an old grandma stealing mangoes, they need to abide by that definition. Everyone is a victim. They have not rebutted this, by the way. Justice is the right for all victims, not only direct victims. We open room for media scrutiny. We open room for public accountability because this is taken through how we see the court process takes into account. This is especially important for an Indonesian because we are already traumatized by politics of backdoor dealings, quid pro quo. We are suspicious of out-of-court settlements. Therefore, the motion should fall. Like there's a reason why plea deals aren't allowed in the status quo because it's so sketchy. Like like that thing. So the final weighing here is that assuming the validity of their setup, it still doesn't resolve most of our concerns because institutionalization does not equate to fairness. Institutionalization won't happen. That's why we oppose and we're not expensive.
Right, thank you, opposition reply, for that fine speech. Finally, to summarize this debate from government, calling upon both reply.
I'd like to confirm that I'm both audible and visible.
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The natural human drive for revenge and vengeance still persists and is symmetrical. I don't understand why then that the need for justice is slower than fear of society silencing, where the state is conditional to a person's power and position in society. Even further, by saying that Indonesian society wants peace and justice, then Whip comes saying that they do want justice. I don't get it. So is it important to get justice in a declining democracy, or opting in for peace because see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil? So these are a few things that are new. I noticed as a new method in Whip. First, the value of reputation comes late in Whip. Second, justice is delayed, which they did not mitigate on their side of the house either way. And third, vigilantism and police abuse comes very late. I think there are a few things that I need to scrutinize on their case. If we look at it aligned with their own logic, our case runs effectively on two reasons. First, LBH has a regional resource, means that we can apply restorative justice under the state as a supporting mechanism with society and lawyers as a mediator. Second, manipulation can happen in public scrutiny or exists in the current CGS, which then proves our point that manipulation is worse on their side for all the reasons that these victims do not see any form of justice because they are being paid out. The state as an entity guarantees the exercise of a victim's agency. I don't know why then that disappears in our side, especially when people still want justice, right? There are a few things that they have not engaged. First, restorative justice mechanism through consensus by giving agency towards victim to deem society is ready or not to mediate their case and was brought first by PM. Even further preempted by saying that the cases with obvious actus reus and mens rea principles would stay in court and not proceed to restorative justice. So extreme cases are not going to go through it, which is very important, judges, because then the mechanism still stands. Second, we tell them that resources will not be depleted because mediation doesn't just happen through courts only, but also through community paralegals too. So there will be paper trails and legal oversight, even if it's just mediatory, which they tell you just institutionalism is confusing. Third, death of activism was only responsive by LBH bailing them out, but then still doesn't engage the real harm. That's the crack of dissent, decline in democracy and right for society to exercise their agency when they're bound to get prosecuted, and no self-correcting mechanism was explained on their side. So one simple clash on equitability. Government tells you that the circumstances in which the state creates that allows the perpetration of the crime, we tell you that the people on the ground, the most marginalized and the minority, are the most disadvantaged in the system, which makes the legal system unequitable to them while advantaging the perpetrator with the most resources. Even if they can find back allies, it makes it even harder because you are under public scrutiny for not going through restorative justice instead. So we're still balancing the scales. Second, OP tells you that because of societal norms in Indonesia, society, they are more likely to opt into and be on the side of the perpetrator with social status and corruption will be far worse. First, they never told you how the status quo is better when the victims are silenced or even worse, murdered without given actual legally binding restorative justice or protection as part of the interest of Indonesian society, because we're seeing a decline in democracy as described as LO. Our side then plays it and tell you that democracy is still in your hands. Two, why is silencing more important compared to rising activism? This is the question that's already been put out since PM. Third, we don't understand how the restorative justice is better on their side for all the characterization that they have told you without telling you how agency is better delivered. So the way is simple. First, harm mitigation. We tell you that the current harms are mitigated when you do give people their agency to exercise their right to access the legal system through a supporting mechanism. Two, interest of society to regain fairness and retain justice through means that minimize corruption and backdoor settlement that harms the most important actors who are the people on the ground. Positives, at least we create better integration within the status quo for perpetrators in the end so they don't go through the social debt. Tipping point, which side mitigates the harm of informal justices when you are unable to access justice even with existing resources. So government benefits de-escalating conflicts to focus on a concrete harm. In a diverse society, unresolved conflict isn't just limited to victim versus offender, but instead communal. Verdict can only settle a case, but not claim down the trigger to a communal riot. For example, masalah agama or race. So restorative justice is the only way to fulfill the ultimate interest of Indonesian society because Indonesia needs justice that prevents social fragmentation for all that.
Right. Thank you so much, Government Employee, for that kind remarks. And thank you, everyone, for the wonderful debate. It's been a pleasure to witness such a great debate. Yep, this is final round. The result will not be announced directly. Feel free to directly leave this breakout room and wait freely for the result announcement later. Thank you so much, everyone. It's a really, really good round. For judges, let's move to, wait, let me check. A deliberation room for discussion. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.